Hey, welcome to Creative Block. We're your hosts, Vee
and Sean. We interview people in creative industries about their life, work, and hobbies while we doodle jam.
We ask people on YouTube and Instagram and Threads and Patreon if they had specific topics they wanted us to discuss, as well as some drawing prompts.
Today, we have with us Gabe Lin. Welcome.
Hi.
Hello. I don't see anything like saying what my lines are, so I'm just gonna...
No. You can just say hi.
Okay, cool.
That's okay.
Yeah. What people don't know is that we script entirely all of our guests' lines. Gabe is the first one to improvise.
Yes.
I'm joking.
And it's just because Gabe can't read. And we're accommodating to that, and we like to just improv.
I never learned, and no one ever said anything.
I just draw pictures now.
Yeah.
So Gabe, I saw your boards for the Mutant Mayhem movie on Instagram, and they're so fun and they're so cute, and I was like, oh, we gotta get Gabe on the podcast to know about like your career and how you started in animation. Did you go to school for art?
I did. I went to CalArts, which is in LA. But before that, I mean, I only spent maybe like a year or two trying to learn how to draw before getting to there. I didn't do art in high school or anything.
Oh, what did you do during that year to like get your drawing skills up there? Like I always love to ask this question to know, like, especially for people who are considering maybe not doing art school, like what are like the ways that you can sharpen your craft?
It was a lot of just taking the bus to any kind of life drawing in town, which I came from Chicago, and you would be surprised at what a relatively big city, there was very little life drawing or like art type establishments to like do life drawing in, so it was actually pretty difficult.
Yeah, that's really interesting because, yeah, like you said, I would have thought Chicago would have offered a lot of like life drawing classes. That's funny.
Yeah,
all the venues are being taken up by comedy.
Yeah. It's only improv.
it's comedy only, no art.
Yeah, it was maybe like, I want to say probably 2 or 3 places in the city that like had regular life drawing. So I actually ran into some people that would eventually become classmates and friends because it was like the only place to draw.
Oh, that's really cool. So do you mean that like you kind of made a little community with the people you met at life drawing in Chicago, and then all of you guys kind of like, what's the word, like encourage each other to like pursue art?
We were all a little like introverted weirdos, so we would be drawing and life drawing, and then from my experience, you would take notice immediately if there was anyone below the age of 40 at these life drawing sessions, because most of them are just like very old artists that like the life drawing venues were just like artist communes that like they would hire their own models, so you'd attend it, and anyone under 40, you'd be like, what's this kid doing here? And sometimes you'd see that maybe they have a life drawing book that's like very commonly used for like animators, and you'd kind of suss out that, oh, this kid's trying to get into animation, and then over time maybe you'd start talking, but we were very shy, so we would say hi or maybe look at our drawings, but we wouldn't talk outside of life drawing.
Oh, that's so funny. Oh, that's so funny. Yeah, but you said you did manage. I don't know. You did manage eventually to just kind of like be friends, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I relate to this story.
It's like in spite of yourselves, although you were working against yourselves every day, you managed to magnetically find each other.
Yeah.
No, I relate to that because I feel like when I was like going to the zoo every weekend to get better at drawing animals and stuff, like for the longest time I was like the only like artist kid, like most of the family was just families. But then I noticed there was like one guy also drawing, and we like sussed each other out for like a while, for probably a month or two, and eventually we were like, hey, Yeah, you're drawing the monkeys. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just
It's like, how long do you have to be next to each other before you
Yeah, but
speak up and like?
yeah, because there's a lot of room, and you're like, and you've noticed each other, and you've noticed each other.
yeah, it's one of those weird, awkward social interaction. Especially, I think, like, when you're a kid,
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to like start the conversation, even though like you both see each other drawing what is clearly like stuff tailored to become a animation portfolio. So like you both know what's going on, but no one wants to be the first one to say hi.
You don't want to be rejected.
Exactly.
So you were doing life drawing. Is there any other kind of like exercises you were doing? You were like prepping for your portfolio and stuff?
I did try to go to the zoo, but the zoo in Chicago, it could have changed, but the zoo in Chicago is incredibly depressing.
Oh, no.
It's not like it's not their fault. I think I've been like, I live in LA now. I've been to the San Diego Zoo, even the LA Zoo, and they're both great. But I think Chicago, because of just like how cold it gets, the way the zoo is designed is like almost like a bunker where like half the animals are in like concrete buildings and like very small spaces because they have to like keep them insulated. So you would go there and all the animals are just like surrounded by gray concrete and in very small like cages, and I'm sure they're trying their best, but it wasn't fun to draw them, just because a lot of them just didn't even have an adequate amount of space to roam around.
Well, if you need to go reference sad animals, you know what I mean? Like if you're working on like a sad animal movie,
well,
like it sounds
if I
perfect.
ever work on a sad animal movie, I know where to, like, guys, you know where we gotta go. We gotta fly over to Chicago.
Wow. It's funny because I there was like a year I was me and my sister had a book club where we were like reading all these like kind of like books that got a prize for like kids literature, and there was one of the books in there that was literally about like a gorilla in a zoo, and it was so sad. It was the saddest book, and I was like, I don't know, I was like, should kids read this like very sad book about like a gorilla in a zoo that's just kind of like exploiting animals? Maybe it's good for like awareness, I don't know. Tangent. So you've put together your portfolio, and it sounds like you got into call-outs right away, right? You just kind of like submitted it, and
Yeah, I submitted it after a year of live drawing practice, and I was lucky enough to get in. I think the standards there were just perfectly low enough for me to squeeze by, because I remember the work I submitted. It was not good.
Did you do the full 5 years at CalArts, or did you? Because I know like
I did
sometimes
4 years. I think the character animation program is 4 years.
And how was your experience looking for your first gig? I like to ask that question to see like how long it took you to find
like
that
how did you
first
transition
job?
from being bad, having a bad portfolio, to working your first animation job? That's a long way.
That's a good question. I think I'm just constantly just skating by, just barely.
Wait, so you're telling me that your other portfolio for the first job was also bad?
Oh yeah, it was bad.
Hell yeah, let's go. Let's fail our way up. We love it, dude.
I
I
got
love
stories for how bad that.
Please tell it.
So, also, I haven't drawn Lincoln in so long, so I'm just trying to remember.
Me neither, dude.
What does he?
I worked on the first like 3 seasons, and I completely forgot.
Oh really? Yeah, I'm like.
Yeah.
I don't even remember. I know he has a circle head, and that's about it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I did have like an internship at Titmouse as like my first real-ish job, even though like it was unpaid. So I don't personally count it. But I did an internship at Titmouse for a summer, and then my first like paid like job was at DreamWorks as a story trainee. I submitted a portfolio, and then after that, they had like kind of like a, hey, you got into the finalists, so here's like a story prompt, and then they said board a new sequence, 100 panels with one of these prompts or whatever. And I feel like I love these sad drawings. Sad bear.
I'm just gonna draw sad animals for the rest of the podcast.
My prompt was just like, or like the story I boarded was just fucking off the walls. I think I boarded it in a night because I think at that point in my life, and that's not to say I don't still do this, but I leave it until the last minute because I can't think of anything good, and then I panic, and then I just go crazy over one night, and just whatever happens.
I feel like there's like two kinds of artists, and there's that one
and then
version.
there's that, whatever that is.
And then there's the version of like the like very type A that's like, I'm just gonna make a whole plan with a little schedule for myself, and I'm gonna figure it out day by day. That's so funny.
I don't want to say which one I am.
I think I know which one you are.
No, I'm a last minute. Like I'm always like, listen, half of the work is being done in my brain as we speak while I'm playing this video game or whatever. Usually it's like, oh, like I'm doing my own drawings and I'm like thinking about this other thing or whatever. And then last minute, I've like, but the thing is I've limit tested. I've limit tested my own abilities, so I know the least amount of time it can take for me to do something and have it still be good work. And then, it gets down to that time and I'm like, oh my God, okay, I gotta go beast mode. And, but so I get it. I understand where you're coming from. I try not to do it. I try not to do it as much anymore, but it does happen for sure.
Yeah, I've grown a little bit in that I know what is too much for even me in one night.
Yes.
And then I leave it just enough where it's questionable sometimes, and then I'm like, oh Lord, can I actually do this? But yeah, so I boarded this test, and I wish I still had it because it was like, maybe it was because it was just a weird idea that they responded to it and they like asked for an interview. But what I boarded was like, I boarded like this story where these kids are playing baseball in their backyard and they hit it over the fence, and their neighbor is the Great Pyramids of Giza. And so they hop the fence to try to get their baseball, and then the pyramid like zaps them up and there's a bunch of alien mummies in there and they take off. It was weird. And I think when I had turned it in, I was so sleep deprived that I just sent it, and then I woke up the next day to like just look at what I had sent, and I was like, what the hell is this? But they seemed to, there was something they saw on that they deemed worthy to talk to me about. So that's how I got my first job. Oh, also, this is not like a good thing, but I was also very irresponsible with like my time management in terms of going to interviews. So I think they had scheduled this interview to be like at 8 a.m. in their office in Glendale, and our school is in Valencia, which is maybe like 30 minutes away. So I decided that it'd be cool to just party with my friends until like 4 or 5 a.m. 4 or 5, and then I was like, okay, I've got like 2 hours of sleep. I took the 2 hours of sleep. I had also agreed to drive another one of my friends from school to an interview that she was having at Disney TV. So I picked her up and we went, but I was still like a little like nauseous from the night before. So on the drive to the Burbank area, I like had to pull over on the freeway, and I like just puked all over myself.
And those were the clothes you had to go to the other interview in.
Yeah, I puked on myself, and then I had to rush to the studio and like hose myself off and explain why I was soaking wet and maybe smelled sour.
How did that go?
I don't understand
I feel like
how
this
I
is
got
everyone's
away with
nightmare.
It, but
Please be specific. Please tell me. Wait, if I'm the executive or whatever or person that's interviewing you, like, did they ask? Were they like, "Oh, did something? Is it raining outside or what?
It was I was being interviewed by 3 people. It was like the artist manager, our future like mentor who is maybe you know him, Rad Seacrest.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
So he was gonna be our mentor, and then like a producer, and they had this setup in their interview where I was sitting at a table, and all 3 of them, like one facing in front of me, one on one side, one on the other. So I was like surrounded, and I saw that they like clocked. They like looked at my like arm because I was wearing like a button-up shirt, trying to look nice, and they had noticed that I was just like soaking wet, and
they could just smell you from all sides.
Yeah,
They're just
yeah.
like surround sound, smell-o-vision. Like,
Yeah, and my excuse was that I had spilled breakfast over myself, and
Nice.
they nodded their heads and didn't say anything after.
Okay, because when you said that you showed up and you had to like explain yourself, I thought that you told the truth, and I was like,
No, I would never tell the truth.
that's a good quality to get hired.
but I'm glad that you made it.
I would never tell the truth,
Yeah.
and I bow it right now. Okay, so you lied. You were wet. You were
I
covered in
lied,
throw up.
yes.
You hadn't slept, and you were in this interview with 3 people. How did you convince them to give this wet young man a chance?
I'll be honest, I don't know how I convinced them. I don't even really remember that interview. I think I was just like so nervous about just my situation, and like worried that they would blacklist me or something, that I kind of talked for about 30 minutes nonstop, answered all their questions, and blacked out. I was like, what happened? I walked out, picked up my friend from Disney, and we left. And I was like, I need to lie down. I wish I could remember even what questions were asked of me.
So imagine how much you'd kill an interview if you didn't have any of that go wrong.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you beat it on hard mode, dude.
If I were
Or
responsible
maybe
myself.
that was the secret sauce to make it happen, maybe that's your little ritual.
The secret sauce was within you all along,
Yeah.
and then you had to wash it off.
That's so crazy. And then that's so awesome. So you were like a trainee at DreamWorks?
Yeah, it was a training with maybe I think 5 or 6 other people.
How long's the trainee program at DreamWorks?
You know what? I don't quite remember, but I want to say it was probably like 3 or 4 months.
What kind of stuff do they have you do in the trainee program? Do they like have you work on shows, or like is it like assignments?
So there's like an overarching assignment where they give you a bunch of rejected scripts that the studio had bought, and they're kind of like, hey, pick one of these as a team and just board like act 1 of this movie. Board it, like you don't have to stick to what the script is, but like the premise of this IP, just try to make this into something interesting. So there was like that as like the overarching project, and then every week we would meet with other departments, other shows, and they would sometimes throw us in with one movie for a week to help out on like, I don't know, comedy passes or something. Yeah, it was a learning experience. I think I probably would have learned more if I had just gone into another studio as just like as a board artist or a board revisionist.
Oh yeah, what do you mean? What do you mean by that? Like, as in like?
I think there wasn't enough guidance for us to like learn much, so we just we just boarded like we usually did when we were students, and
I see.
And there wasn't a lot of, like if let's say you were a board artist on like a Cartoon Network show, like you would get immediate feedback from showrunners or directors.
Yeah.
There wasn't like a very critical person that like, after you pitch your stuff, there wasn't anyone that says like, I hate this. Or like, like, hey, this needs to be better.
So your first gig after the trainee program, was that in TV or feature? Because the trainee was for a feature type of.
The trainee was for feature, and I had joined DreamWorks right when they were kind of like imploding.
Mm-hmm.
So we were kind of supposed, like, the program is supposed to be kind of like Pixar, where it's like, hey, if you're good, the end of this program, you just join onto a movie. But because they were imploding, there was no movie to join. So what ended up happening was like some artists left and went on to go to other studios, and some of us got put into like TV because DreamWorks had their Netflix shows that they were doing at the time.
Mm.
And I think maybe one or two stayed on to work in whatever shows that were available in future, but there weren't many.
Mm.
But overall, I mean, it was a fun time.
So, what was your first feature experience, and was it like a big, I guess, surprise in terms of like the difference of feedback that you were used
Oh
to?
yeah. So when I was at DreamWorks, I was temporarily on a feature, but the feature kept getting delayed. So eventually, it was one of those movies that got scrapped, or I think they eventually made it. So I was on Croods 2 for a while, but the version of the movie that I was on was canned. So I obviously didn't get any credit whenever it did get made.
So was that the first time something like that had happened to you? Was that like a thing that you had to come to learn and deal with emotionally, that there's like large projects that you might just get canned? Was that the first time?
Yeah, that was like the first time I had even like considered that as a possibility, because I feel like coming out of school, I was like, we've got literally a whole production team here. We've got artists, viz dev artists, a whole storyboard team. We're all doing this one thing. How do you throw this away and just say, no, we're not doing this? So that was like a shocker to me. Also, just like the whole like watching the studio become on the verge of like collapse was something that was crazy scary as like a new artist. I feel like there was like a specific day where they announced like a lot of layoffs, and they kept all the trainees because we were like dirt cheap, but they had fired a lot of like the story artists. And so it was just like they announced it, and as the trainees we're just hanging out with the rest of like the whole studio story department, and everyone was just like in an office just drinking and just like commiserating. Like they're just, no one was really saying anything. We were just there drinking and like digesting the news, and I was that was like not what I was expecting for my first like real job.
Wow, yeah. Wow. For a first
The
job,
dark side.
yeah, that's so tough for a first job. I feel like, like you work like so hard and then it just vanishes. Because I feel like it's been kind of happening a lot more recently, like in the animation industry. Like, I mean, if people have been on Twitter, they can like see that like a bunch of stuff got canned, and I feel like last year most of the stuff I worked on got canned.
Yeah, it definitely feels like it's been happening more frequently.
My first job, I started working at a company, and it was just a company out of a house. Then within the first year and a half, they grew to 300 people working out of like 3 buildings, and then in 3 years, completely shut down. And it was like I saw, it was like seeing a being come into existence and then die all in the like the short like first job kind of like.
Yeah, I don't know. Like something, I think like it definitely started happening more often when Netflix came in. It's just like there was a lot of very fast booms and equally fast busts for studios that maybe poured more money into things than they should have. But it's rough because
I wonder too if there's like, I don't know, like a part of me is like, there's a moment and I was like, there's just too many things getting greenlit, and I was just like, are they like really like paying attention to what they're greenlighting?
Yeah, they're
Some
not.
point I was like,
Yeah, I feel like some of my friends who like joined Netflix, that was kind of the vibe when they went on that hiring spree. It was just like they don't even care what shows are being made. They just want to flood the market with content.
Wow, that's so crazy.
But yeah, like right now there's like obviously it's like very slow in animation, and I feel like it's got to be a little bit scary for kids coming straight out of school and into this. I feel like I can sympathize just because like it was more isolated when I was at DreamWorks, but it's definitely like it's not a comforting feeling knowing that you've entered kind of an industry that has these moments, like not super often, but it's not uncommon to have these like giant lulls in animation.
Do you feel like that kind of like having this experience so early on kind of like helped you build some resilience, or like to like kind of get used to it a little bit more, or like to that like uncertainty?
Yeah, I feel like it's definitely changed the way I approach jobs. I feel like before we started recording, we were talking a little bit, and we're like talking about like me jumping from studio to studio, and I feel like I've from that experience, I've just kind of said to myself, don't depend on a studio.
Yeah.
Always look out for what's best for you, and if there's nothing you like at this studio, it's not like it's not bad to just jump, go somewhere else, and then if situations change, then you can always return. Because I feel like a lot of people when I was at DreamWorks is DreamWorks is signing contracts for story artists where you would sign like a 2-year or a 4-year contract with them, and like studios don't do that anymore. But it was like if you sign a contract with them, you're like, hey, I'm gonna be here for 4 years. It was like a really nice kind of
security.
Yeah, security or like stability, especially for like people who are trying to start families. But then that like once that all collapsed, you're like, like that contract kind of means nothing.
Yeah, because that's something that's kind of interesting. I feel like, because I think when I was hired at Sony, I was at will. So I don't even think there was like a contract. There was this thing where like they hired me on a 6-month tryout. Like I forgot if it was a 3 or 6-month tryout. So there was like a tryout period, and they like renewed the contract. But then I think it was at will from what I remember. So it was just kind of like, well. And yeah, it's kind of interesting, that thing where it's like that has changed, that you don't it's kind of like a gig.
Yeah,
It's the gig economy.
I think that most animators or people working in the animation industry can relate to the feeling of like, I'm on a show and that gives me maybe the most security that I can have, but I know that like either I'm on the show or I'm on this movie for a finite amount of time, whether that's like 6 months or 2 years or whatever it is, and then I'm probably going to have to figure out what I'm doing after that. Whether that means checking around the studio and seeing if they can keep you on for another project or looking for another thing. It's like, it is a way of being and working that not very many careers can relate to, I think. Like, I've talked to people who aren't in that, and they're like, wait, you're like, so what are you doing next? And I'm like, I don't know. And they're like, are you freaking out? And I'm like, this happens every single time in between a show. I'll find something.
Yeah. I feel like there's probably not a lot of schools that are preparing students for that. Just like the amount of like instability and worry is always going to be there, and you just have to prepare for it. So like always having like an emergency fund, like knowing that it might be a while in between jobs. If a studio doesn't have anything lined up, then you're like, okay, well, it might be months before I find something, and like just kind of being at peace with that, and obviously planning ahead for that, because I feel like inevitably it happens to most people in the industry.
If you're comfortable talking about that, like, what's the longest stretch that you've been unemployed, or like in between like industry gigs?
So I've been kind of lucky in that probably now is the longest that I've ever had, and it was maybe like 2 months. And I was also kind of fortunate enough to, like, after the Ninja Turtles movie wrapped, pretty soon after, the producer had reached out and said, hey, we'd like to make another movie, so we'd like to have you on board. And them kind of like having me sign a contract for that. So like unless like things change, like we're slated to start next month. So what's been nice,
It's been announced, right?
it has been announced, but I'm always just
Okay.
like that doesn't mean anything. There's been movies that
Just playing it. You want
yeah
to play it safe, yeah.
yeah. But like the nice part is just like they expressed that they wanted to rehire me onto. Oh, hello, there's my cat. I don't know if you guys can hear him, but
Yeah,
Yes.
no,
He's
he's
so cute.
He announced himself coming up. He was like, I'm here.
yeah, if he hears us, either me or my fiance in a meeting for too long, he comes up and starts screaming. He's an attention hog, so if he sees that people are talking, he walks over.
That's so cute, though.
Lost my train of thought, but
yeah, we were talking about like they reached out to you to come back on the Sega movie. The cool thing is like Mutant Mayhem was your first head of story experience.
yes.
How would you describe the difference between being a story artist for feature and a head of story?
So I think it was surprising because a head of story role was basically I still had to storyboard my sequences, but it was a lot more like management stuff that I enjoyed, but it was eye-opening how just like being in meetings for other departments and having like a little bit of input and like, you know, say in terms of like interacting with them and trying to work with heads of other departments and making everyone's jobs easier. But I enjoyed it, but it was a lot more work just because they would still assign me the same amount of boards as every other artist on the board team. So I still have to board action sequences, or I still have to board whatever they have that needs done. But in between that, I'll be in meetings, or I'll be checking in with the other artists just to make sure that they're doing all right, and like, you know, if they're struggling with anything, just trying my best to make sure that every story artist can do their best work and has like any support that they need to get that job done, which I like. I like jumping from thing to thing. I feel like storyboarding is fun, but I don't know. I get like both antsy and lethargic when I am bored in a sequence for too long. Like I get sleepy because I'm like, I know what I want to do in this, and now it's just like very tedious drawings, which I don't know. I get impatient, I guess is the answer. Like I'm like, I know I want to make this guy do a flip and then do this thing, and now it's just like a lot of struggling to get the drawings in. So breaking that up between other things was a nice change of pace for me.
I know we wanted to ask if there was a noticeable difference in between working on kind of like short form or TV storyboarding and then going into movies and film feature length. I've heard that the storyboarding process is different, certainly stretched longer. But what would you say were the biggest things to like either get used to or try to figure out process wise that maybe were different?
Yeah, we were talking about this a little earlier, and we were talking about how I feel like it's obviously two different ways of boarding, but I guess in TV, you have a shorter schedule, but there's, just by the nature of it, there's less room for changes. So usually, in my experience, like I'd have like two weeks, maybe 3, depending on the show, to board the episode, and then I'd get notes from the showrunner, and then I'd have another week or 2 to adjust, fix it, and that's the episode. That's it. And the time frame, depending on the show, is like that can get pretty crazy, but also it's kind of a relief knowing that after that time frame is done, it's like it's done. There's no going back. Yeah. And like I was talking with Vee about it, and like feature is just constantly just redoing sequences. Sometimes it's like complete redos, sometimes it's just like small changes, and it's like it's like it almost feels like a marathon where sometimes they assign you like giant, very time consuming sequences, and like every artist knows that there's no way this sequence is getting into the movie. It's like 7 pages long, for just like a really obscure idea, and you're like, I still have to do it. I have to do this 7 pages, and then I have to do notes on it, and like just knowing that you're basically doing useless work, but you still have to give it your best because there's like like there's always just the off chance that some of this gets used. So like that's always like something that I personally have a hard time with. I'm just like, God damn it. Like there's no way this gets in. Why am I spending my time on this? And then inevitably it gets cut. Like most of the time I feel like board artists know what is actually useful in a story. But you gotta like do the work even when you know it's stupid, just because like someone else needs to realize it's stupid.
I think it's really great that you highlight that, because I feel like this is something that's not really talked about in feature when you look at all these like behind the scenes and all that, and they make it look like you just kind of draw a beautiful sequence and then they just like they're like, oh, this is beautiful, just add a little touch here and there, and then it just kind of goes in and it's like, no, that's really not the process at all. It's like
yeah. I just came back from there was a film festival type thing in Mexico, Pixelatl, and I gave a talk on that. It was really slapdash because originally it was like supposed to be me and Kyler, the co-director, and we were going to talk about the movie, but then Kyler wasn't able to go, so it was just me, and I was like, oh, now I gotta create this whole presentation out of thin air, and I like just grabbed a hard drive of some of my files and I tried to figure out what I was going to talk about. And what I ended up talking about was like what we're talking about now, which is just the idea that the sequences you see artists post and like the stuff you see in the final product for feature takes like months, because like there's like, maybe 6 or 7 different versions of this thing. Multiple artists have touched it. Sometimes it gets thrown away, and then when the writers or directors kind of decide where they want to go in the story, then sometimes some things get brought back, and it's just like it's a lot of just putting out just a massive amount of work, seeing what sticks, changing it, and then I feel like a lot of people probably don't realize that when they see artists post it, because they just see the final product. And I was trying my best to convey that, like me posting stuff on Instagram, that was like multiple iterations worth, and like other artists helped give me ideas for it. So it's not the first try type of thing.
Well, I've heard from people working in feature that sometimes there's situations where they'll work on like say like the first half or something of the feature, and then by the time it comes out, there's absolutely nothing that they even touched that is that is in the movie. Has that ever happened to you? Has that ever happened to you?
Yeah, that's happened to me. Let's see, like I worked on the Grinch movie for a little while, and nothing I did got into the final screening. So Illumination was a little different, where if you had worked it for a set amount of time on the project, then you get credit. If not, then they give you credit based on how much of your work shows up on screen. And because I didn't have a lot, or I had like nothing that showed up, basically I just didn't get credit for being on the movie.
Oh my god.
That's one of the things that is so scary sometimes with feature, is that credit is like so dependent on the studio philosophy. Like for the longest time,
they're not obligated to give you credit.
Yeah, for the longest time I was like really scared I wasn't gonna get credited for a Spider-Verse 2. I was like telling everybody I don't know, but because I was there only for a year and a half, so
only for a year and a half. That's a
long ass time.
Is so funny. Yeah.
No,
only
but
for a year and a half. That's nuts.
It's a long time, but we started in 2019, and the movie came out this year.
Yeah,
it's like
that's
4 years. It took 4 years.
I will say, like I think if you were at DreamWorks or Illumination, you probably wouldn't get credit because. Like, I'm sure the story changed drastically from when you were on it to When?
I feel like the story didn't change like
Oh,
crazy.
okay.
Like when it was that's kind of like I was there during the major changes of the story, and so I remember some of the stuff that I boarded. I did like a first like draft of certain sequences, and they're in the movie. They're not exactly how I boarded them, obviously, because it went through a lot of artists, but like a lot of the stuff that I remember seeing when I was there is still in the movie. It didn't
Oh,
like
okay.
it didn't change as much as I thought it would change, if that makes sense. Like I was expecting to go in the theater and see a completely different movie from what I saw when I was on the show.
Okay, that's actually I feel like very very rare because I feel like for Ninja Turtles, like even our production schedule was like pretty short in terms of feature. I think I think I was one of the first board artists to join, and from when I joined to final, it was maybe like 2.5 years. And like within the first year, we had a movie up, but by the end of production, it was like a completely different movie. So all the boards from the first version was pretty much gone except for maybe a few shots.
Oh
And I
wow.
feel like that's in my personal career is like the common thing where it's like, oh, like the first year or two they're throwing all of that out. So for a lot of studios, it's just kind of up to their good graces of like if they're willing to give artists who are there for the first year or two credit if they leave. And I know like Illumination generally didn't, mainly because probably they have their whole bonus structure thing, and they don't want to pay.
Oh yeah.
They don't want to pay too many people.
Yeah, I have some friends that like stayed at Illumination for a very long time because of the bonuses. They can be pretty good.
Yeah, but like I guess what sucks is just like you have to be on the movie. Like you have to get credit on the movie that does well, and like to be fair, a lot of their movies do very well. But
yeah,
like what was it? Like I was on Secret Life of Pets, and that movie did like by every other studio's standards, probably it did pretty well. And even then, like the bonus was like okay. It was like probably not worth the pay cut that I think I took because Illumination uses that bonus incentive as a way to try to bargain your salary down. They're like, hey, if you stick around and your movie makes $1 billion, you'll make a lot more money. You'll make a lot more money, and this is why we want to pay you slightly less. But if your movie doesn't do $1 billion, then your bonus doesn't exactly make it worth it.
Oh man, studio.
So
when you really think about it, you're like, oh my gosh, these techniques. But they're all different, though. They're all like they all like work differently in terms of like their pay philosophy, I guess, or like how they try to retain their talent and stuff.
Yeah.
So I think that we've talked about a lot of things that they're maybe a little bit scary or might make someone not want to work on feature films. Doom. But what are some things that you really what are some things that you really like, or some things that you've really had fun doing that that are a part of making a feature film? Like things reasons why you like it.
Oh yeah, I could talk a lot about that. Especially I think in the Ninja Turtles, I think it's been by far the best production I've been on, both like in terms of the crew and the just how the crew got along, but also it was in my experience, it was a very healthy work environment. Like occasionally we'd have to put in some overtime, but very, very rarely actually. And I really appreciate that. And some stuff that I really liked from that, and in general, I guess in feature, is that as a general rule, we have a bigger budget, so some of the stuff that you want to do, some of the ideas that you have, you can do, and it's like it's a little freeing to have just almost like someone give you a script and be like, here it is, go crazy, make it the coolest, best thing that you can possibly do. Because like I remember being a trainee at DreamWorks and then being put onto like their Netflix shows. Like they weren't like the cheapest shows, but even then, I like a lot of my storyboard notes were just like budget notes. They're like, this is too expensive an idea. Let's cheat it. Let's like we have a character stepping in a puddle. Water effects are too expensive. We could maybe let's shoot it so that he's like stepping on a puddle off screen, and we just have the sound effects, and you're like, man, this is lame. It's just like a lot of like camera cheats.
The puddle's frozen.
Yeah. It's just like a lot of that where it's just like, let's just try to let's like not show it, but like have sound effects, or let's think of like another creative solution to not have to spend money on this. And like that was interesting in its own right, but it was always frustrating because you're like, but like the solution we have isn't as good as just the first idea, which was like this thing that doesn't feel like it should be that challenging. But like, you know, I'm not the one with the budget books, so that's like
Yeah.
hands down the most noticeable thing for me is just like being a little bit less hampered down by just like money constraints. Like we still have meetings about like, this is too expensive for Ninja Turtles, but less so than for sure than TV.
What is too expensive for Ninja Turtles? Like like how ridiculous of an idea what does it have to be too expensive for Ninja Turtles? Because I'm curious.
Well, so like even for Ninja Turtles, our movie is relatively modestly budgeted. So I think our budget was like 70 million, which is on par with Illumination films.
Which is crazy because when you think about it, it's like such a it's kind of a feat in terms of how it looks. Like, you know, I feel like Ninja Turtles is the only movie besides Spider-Verse that has like a look that pushes the boundaries of CG.
Yeah. I was actually surprised that our budget was that small. I thought for sure that like just the visuals that we had would balloon this into some like massively like over budgeted movie that will be a huge flop.
For reference, like a movie like Spider-Verse is more like 250 million, so it's like 3 times more. Just for the audiences,
I think the most recent one wasn't it like 150 or something. Like they originally said it was 100, but then like later on they kind of said 150, but it's within that
maybe
range.
150.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, because I feel like maybe 250 is one of maybe it's more like Disney.
Yeah, I know
budgets.
for sure. For anyone listening, I think like Disney movies are by far the most expensive animated films out there. They're like 200 million to maybe 250 for some of their crazier ones. Like I know Lightyear, Elemental, all that stuff was 200, at least 200 million. Yeah, they're very expensive, and they're very like graphics intensive. You know, there's a lot of effects, and like we had to find ways to cheat that, or like trying to find ways to make unique visuals within our budget.
You're just watching Lightyear, and there's like so many puddles. The whole movie, there's
yeah.
You're just like clenching your fists. You're like,
that added easily $50 million to their budget. They should have talked to me. I would have told them not to.
No, I think that's the thing. Is like in 3D, some of the stuff, like if you work in like in TV and your show is CG, one of the first things that production will tell you is like no effects, like water, fire, smoke, all of these are like crazy expensive. Fur is also crazy expensive, and obviously sets, like big sets, are like crazy hard to render. And then how do they call it, like collusion or something? Like when for example, you can have water, but a character going into the water is insane.
Yeah. That was another one of my notes where like it was like the season finale of some like I think it was the the King Julian show, and the season finale had like a giant robot, and like we had to have the main characters like destroy it. So like we were like, hey, what if he goes into the ocean and explodes? And like the producer was like, we can't have him touch the water. So we'll have a close up shot of his foot, like just like, oh, his foot was like just about to touch the water. And then we cut to a wide shot where the characters are just staring at the monster, but you never see the monster, and you just hear the explosion. And it was the lamest thing I've ever seen, where it was just like, you guys you didn't show any of the cool ending. You just showed it all off screen. And
that's so funny.
Yeah, it was just like boom, you hear it, and then they're just, I don't know. It was one of those things that convinced me that I did not like being constrained to that extent, because like I think having constraints is really good for like creativity and just like forcing you to have some parameters to work around. But I think I think there's like some things that are like, you gotta show them, you gotta show these things, you gotta show them exploding. You can't just hide everything with cheats.
Dude, I feel like your whole life you're just gonna build up this desire to like, I want like everything to be in water, so many splashes, and like someday you're just gonna make a movie that's just, it's just like, it's mostly water. It's just mostly puddles, it's battles in water. It's like
I'm gonna make
so
Aquaman
do it.
Whenever they reboot the DC universe. I'm gonna pitch that it'll be animated.
Little Mermaid, we can't have any of it in water, okay? We have to have her already out of the water starting at the beginning of the movie.
That's so funny. Yeah. And then her hair is just like a cap on her head.
Yeah, we
like
have
a
to
Lego
have it.
Style.
yeah, we have to have, we'll tie down her hair. It's in a really tight bun. It's not moving at all. There's no water.
That's why when you think about it, like Elemental, like the Pixar movie, it feels like it's definitely them being like, look at our engine. Look at how well we can do all these effects.
Look at how good
like
our fire is.
But it's also so silly because it's like giant robot, okay, water splash, not cool.
Yeah.
You'd think it would be the opposite.
No, but when you think about it though, in Mutant Mayhem, so I don't think it's a big spoiler. I feel like everybody who's listening to this must have seen the movie. But at the end of the movie, when Superfly grabs all of the animals and becomes this like kind of like almost like a giant robot, like a bio robot, I guess, like a biomech. That must have been pretty insane to build, right? I remember seeing the movie and I was like, I don't know how they pulled that off, because you can see all the
I think that eventually probably was a budget issue. I remember we had sequences where like the turtles were running up the Mega Mutant's back, and like all the animals were like moving characters. Like it was basically just like this weird The Thing amalgamation of like just mutated animals trying to like grab them and drag them into the body, and it was very cool. But like I feel like just the technical like idea of having like a set that like is alive and having the characters move in it was too much.
But they are kind of moving though.
Oh yeah, they're definitely moving, but like we can't like, we never like zoomed in super close and like had them interact with it.
Okay.
So I'm pretty sure that was like a budget thing, or like it was also we also had a lot of like time constraints because we had that vendor studio Micros, who are like insanely talented, and Jeff and Kyler were very adamant about like, and like to their credit, they were also very firm with like what they can and can't do. I think like we had a lot of like near the end moments where they would say, we're not doing this, or like, this is impossible, and then it would be up to us to try to find a solution, or in some cases being like, okay, what if we take out this other shot in this other sequence, maybe like if we take away this from your list, like would you be willing to do this for this other sequence? So it was a lot of bargaining, which I thought was very interesting.
So you were in these meetings as well as the head of story?
I was in like the meetings in terms of discussing what we really wanted to keep, and like what Jeff specifically was like, I'm willing to give this up, and then just like the meetings where them kind of passing on to the producer for them to go handle later. But it was definitely something I've never seen before, and it was very interesting. And I personally like it. I think like treating the vendor studio and all the people who work at that vendor studio like they're a part of the team, and less and less like hey, we paid you to do this, now do it type of thing that some other productions have done in the past. I think I personally like this method better.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's really nice too, that like you guys were able to have like that conversation, and the movie still came out great. It looks really awesome.
Thank you. But yeah, there was a lot of give and take near the end. One of the budget things was, I think one of the boarders, Jacob Starlin, had boarded the ending where Mega Mutant explodes, and it was the way he had it explode was so cool. And like he blows up, and there's like goo and like mist of like blue air everywhere, and it was like very cool to see in storyboards. But it was another one of those, it was like almost like the puddle thing where you're like, this is too complicated and expensive to have goo and mist like go through every street in New York City type thing.
Did you have to choose goo or mist? How many times do you have to make that choice in your life? You know
we ended up having to choose nothing. We just like, he was just gonna blow up in this one shot, and then we show the animals scattering. Which like
there's people watching it that are like, there should have been goo.
Yeah, they're like, no, I can't unsee it. There's no goo. This was a budget cut.
Took me right out of the movie. There's no goo.
There's no goo.
Yeah.
There's plenty of goo in that movie.
No,
I feel like. I know, yeah. That's so funny, though.
Could have been more, though.
That would be so funny if that's like the one thing that breaks the suspension of disbelief. It's just
Rotten Tomatoes review, no goo. Sorry.
during the explosion, no goo. That's so interesting. Like, did you feel like you guys had to like make decisions a little quicker on that movie, because it's like almost not a smaller scale movie, but like you said, it's like a smaller type of budget, like compared to some other like movies that you've been on, maybe like I don't know, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I think compared to other films I've been on, this was much faster paced. So, and it was one of those movies where sometimes studios are pretty lenient in terms of like, we could move this deadline back a little, but Ninja Turtles is such a toy heavy franchise that it was impossible. Like at every meeting that we were in, it would always be a producer saying like, this is the deadline. It's literally impossible because, you know, I don't know, like Walmart is already like, it's in their slate. They're going to release the toy on this day. You cannot delay it, like not even for a day or a week. And it was just like the hard deadline was nice. It like made us make decisions faster. Whereas I think some other movies just kind of, sometimes they get delayed because like they're like, it's not ready yet.
That happened on like the Spider-Verse too. Like I think they forgot to tell Target. I forget if it was Target or Walmart, but there was like a big distribution chain that put out the Spider-Punk toys.
Oh, really?
Before the movie came out. Yeah. Oh. And it's like, that was supposed to be a big reveal in the movie, but the toys came out. I remember that.
Oh, that's crazy. I feel like, yeah.
Were people freaking out?
Yeah.
I don't know if they were freaking out. I don't know if people just knew it was like Spider-Verse related or what. I just remember seeing the tweets and I was like, well, that's odd. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think it went kind of unnoticed, fortunately. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe they're less concerned about the merchandising than like say Ninja Turtles. I feel like merchandising is like their whole thing over on Turtles.
Yeah, that's really cool. I wanted to ask you too, like, kind of what's your philosophy as a leader, as like you taking care of your team, doing handouts, or like managing your team?
Good question. I'm kind of I think from my experiences I've just been kind of trying to pick out the stuff I like from, from Jeff and Kyler and every other director that I've worked with. Like there's stuff that I like in terms of the way they communicate and also like the way they run their crews. And something I personally like is just being relatively hands off. I feel like there's been movies I've been on where the head of story is checking in with me, multiple times a week, and and like whether they mean to or not, I feel like that creates this like pressure that like, oh, every couple of days I need to have something new worth showing. And like when you're given a week or two to make a sequence, sometimes it takes a while to put the ideas together. And sometimes for when I was on those shows, like I would feel this pressure, and then I would just kind of scribble out shittier ideas just so that I could have something to show in 2 days, versus like maybe like on Turtles where we're just kind of hands off, and then in a week we was just like, we'll see you at the pitch, and if you have any questions, just shoot us a message. And I found that
trusting your team.
Yeah, it's
bit,
like
right?
you hired them, you should know what they do, and like you should like what they do. So just trust that they're professionals and that they're gonna turn in quality work. And that's my general stance. I don't like to be overbearing just because I don't like overbearing people. But beyond that, it's just like I feel like the head of story role, sometimes maybe students think that the head of story is the best board artist on the team, and that's very not the case, especially for me. There's so many talented board artists on our team, but like, I don't know, just trying your best to make sure that everyone else looks good is important to me. So like sometimes I'll just be messaging the other artists and on their scene, and I'll be like seeing them pitch before the actual meeting a few days before, and then being like, oh, this could be really cool if we did this instead, and just trying to up their sequences whenever possible. And then if it bombs, like for me, I'm the first one to be like, that was actually my idea, I told him to do that. Don't get mad at the board artist. I just thought it would be funny if he did this. And sometimes from my experiences, whenever people in leadership positions take that hit, it's like a confidence booster that like you're never on the chopping block.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because like,
that's cool.
Yeah, sometimes like some other head of stories I've had, they don't help out, or they suggest some ideas, and then sometimes like those ideas bomb when you pitch, and they're just in the back of the room with the director, and then the director is like talking about stuff he doesn't like, and it's just a little disheartening because you're like, these weren't even my ideas, or stuff like that. And like obviously you're a professional, you can't be like, actually this was his idea, he told me. So I always try to make it a point to take the blame whenever I can, and then also like give credit whenever I can. I feel like giving credit is like a really big deal to me, because a lot of times like artists will have great ideas, and then in a meeting everyone's throwing out ideas and some of them stick, but then after the meeting people forget whose ideas this was. And I'm like personally I'm just always trying to remember who came up with this, because at the bare minimum I always am trying to give them credit whenever if I post something and I'm like, this one part in my sequence was this person's idea. I want to give everyone credit for stuff they contributed, because a lot of stuff can get lost during production.
Yeah, and I feel like you said, I think it like helps build morale, and it also kind of builds like a certain type of like loyalty also between like the crew and the leadership, when people kind of like own up to like either like you said, like, oh okay, like I told the crew to do this, or like, oh yeah, that was the board artist's idea, and like, you know, kind of like celebrating the like little victories.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of stress coming up with boards sometimes and pitching it, and in any scenario where I can be like, this guy just did something so cool, and like hype them up in front of like the rest of the crew, I'm like, I feel like at the very least that'll just make them feel nice, and it'll just make the work feel a little bit more bearable when like things get hard. But then like, you know, at its best, I feel like, you know, it could make them feel more confident, and like they start doing even better work because now they're like, man, I'm so good. I made the whole room laugh, and everyone knows that it was my idea. I don't know. So like stuff like that, it's really important to me.
That's really awesome. I love that. We got quite a bunch of questions actually from our listeners, so I was thinking like,
Yeah.
maybe we could jump to that.
Sure.
And if there's a lot, we could always do a little bit of like speed rounds, like give a few, you know, like a one sentence answer if there's too many.
Yeah, there's a bunch. So from our patron, Claire _ the Rose, Mutant Mayhem story felt very traditional and yet a parody of traditional storytelling principles at the same time. How did you and your team manage that balance? Also, wonderful work, by the way.
Thank you. I'll be honest, I have no idea. I feel like there's so many moving parts in production that for the most part the story team is literally just holding on to their butts, because they're like, we'll get like a new pass of the script every once in a while, and it's just like everyone's just boarding as fast as we can to hit the deadline, and then it goes in the edit, and then the edit changes it a bit, and then by the time we see it in a screening, there's very noticeable differences in the story structure and like even the sequences that we boarded. And it's always interesting to see how things change between the boarding process, the edit process, and like even layout. It's one of those things where I feel like I've talked with friends about it, where I'm like, I want to be on a really good show so that I can see what the hell they even did, because like I've only been on very bad or mediocre shows, and I'm just like, what's like, how did they do it? And I feel like the answer is like no one fucking knows, because I feel like the very first Spider-Verse was kind of the same, where it just from the artists that I've talked to, it's just like it was a giant mess, and everyone was like, this is a disaster, this movie's terrible, and then like at the very last second, you know, they worked it all up in edit, and it turned out to be a great movie. And it was just one of those things where, and there's a lot of Disney movies that do the same, where it seems like it's bad until it's not, and everyone comes out of the screening being like, what the hell just happened, because now it's good. And that kind of happened with us too, where there was a lot of variations of this movie where we came out of the screening like being like, man, this doesn't really work, or this whole story arc doesn't work. And then at some point, like it started working, and then everyone got really excited, and we just kept working on it from there. But I couldn't tell you like how that process happened. It's got to be just like obviously a good director and a good edit team, but like even then, it's never really guaranteed or clear cut how that is done. It happens. You see all the right pieces and it clicks, and then the whole team goes from there.
Yeah.
What was like you've worked on a few films or something. Like, what's your experience been like?
I feel like I guess it it really depends on the team and on the script that you start out with. I worked a little bit on a feature where I read the script and I was like, oh, this is pretty solid. And I was like, I can see this as a movie. I was like, okay, the script, like there's some parts that definitely need like some massaging to just kind of make it really shine. But you know, you read the script and you're like, yes, this is a movie.
Yeah.
And then there's like you read the script and you're like, oh boy, all right, well,
Yeah.
like, well, this has to become a movie at some point, but I don't know how this is gonna happen.
Yeah, and sometimes sometimes the movies with really good scripts still turn out bad somehow. I feel like I don't know. There's like so many moving parts in animation that it's just anything can go wrong and like just derail the whole thing in terms of quality, but then also like one part can just like start going right and then everyone feeds off of that and starts making like a very nice movie. And I wish I wish like I knew how that process happened and like what causes the good movies to be good, because if I knew, I would be writing a book right now.
I feel like when you have someone like who has like a really strong point of view or like a strong sense of like direction, like in like directors or like producers, that kind of helps a lot.
Oh
like
yeah,
when
definitely.
you have, you know, like rather than like, you know, because sometimes that can also happen when you have like leadership that's just kind of like, I don't know. Figure it out, like do something.
Yeah.
You know, that's a little trickier.
Yeah, definitely. I think like a strong like voice in like a leadership role is crazy important.
Oh, this is a really cool question that we got from Instagram from Kylie Del Re. What was something you learned will carry with you in your career in the future from working on Mutant Mayhem?
I feel like our team specifically vibed very well together, and I have some like opinions on why that is, but I think our team was very good at communicating and just being very open with each other in terms of like how their own work was going, but also just like how they were feeling about certain things, what they're struggling with, or story writers being very vocal about how they think the movie is, what they think is bad, and like obviously like offering up suggestions. And it's definitely something that I'm trying to like still internalize so that I can obviously move that on to the next production. Yeah, I don't know. I'm always looking for those things where I'm like, how can I make the next movie I work on better or like more enjoyable for everyone else?
That's really sweet. I love that. We have a really cool question from Thea Driosa. Do you get to explore any natural spaces whenever you take a break from the chaos of the industry? What are your favorite places, and how does it help you recharge and ready yourself to take on more work?
Oh, another good question. I need to take more vacations because I don't. I like this was probably between Ninja Turtles and whenever we start the next one, I think in the coming month. That was like the longest break, and even then I was doing freelance, and I think it's partially because of when I started I was at DreamWorks and I was witnessing like a studio on the verge of collapse, but I was always like I gotta always be working, I gotta be doing something because shit's gonna hit the fan at any moment all the time, and I'm always just like paranoid about it. But I feel like I need to definitely take more breaks, because I think when Ninja Turtles wrapped, I didn't realize how burnt out I was until I started trying to do freelance, and it was like the most exhausting thing just starting the freelance, and like the work wasn't particularly challenging, and it was like, you know, I was telling myself, I was like, this is stuff I've done a lot of times before. I don't know why I'm having such a hard time just doing this, like pretty simple boards. and I think it took me a while to realize that I was just exhausted. And so after I finished the freelance, I took an actual break. We used this trip for my talk at Pixelado. We used it as like a vacation. So me and my fiance, Danny Ducker, we went and we just kind of, I prepared for the talk, but for most of the week I was like, we should just try to go on our own thing, find some cool places to eat and just relax. And it was very nice. I'm hoping I can do a little bit more of that before I start up again.
That's so cool. Yeah, that was a really cool answer. I hope you do manage to get to take more vacation. It's hard to allow like yourself as an artist to like take time off, I think. Yeah, I feel like this year was kind of like the best year to kind of like take time off because it's like so crazy in the industry.
That definitely helped, where it was almost like, you know what, it's hard just to find a job right now, so I'm just gonna use that to my advantage and make it into like a forced break, and just like kind of having the confidence that I'm like, you know what, I'll get a job eventually, just don't freak out about it for now. And I was lucky enough to like have enough saved up where I could afford to take an extended break if I needed to.
Well, I'm manifesting vacation for you in these relaxing drawings.
I love that little drawing that you did of Gabe in the grass. It's so cute.
Yeah, let's draw some.
We have a bunch of Twitter questions that are also great from @Dimsdoodles on Twitter. What can underexperienced board artists do to improve their character acting abilities and not rely too heavily on stock choices?
I feel like in terms of acting, it's kind of the same as like animators, where if you have like a little mirror or something, you can just record yourself or look in the mirror and just do some small actings, because I feel like sometimes you do default to like just like, oh, I'm just gonna have him when he's nervous, just have him kind of scratch the back of his head like this thing that I feel like, you know, it's like it's really easy and it reads, but like sometimes if you just do it yourself, you're like, oh, this is how I would do it. I'm like a little, you know, like a little bit different, and it's like enough.
I usually just record myself and I pee my pants, and then I draw myself peeing my pants, and then you get
the
this
studios
really
are
nice
always like,
subtle
man,
peeing
this
your pants
guy
performance.
always pees his pants. What is up with this guy?
Yeah, he came into the interview and his pants were peed, and we were like, was it raining or something? And I was like, no, I just I spilled some breakfast on myself. And they're like, you're hired.
Call back. Peak comedy.
Full circle, baby.
Sean is so great at this. It's like like and you make it sound scripted. It's amazing.
We've established that this is scripted.
Yeah, Vee and I's performance is scripted. I just am so impressed by your improv on this episode. Gabe. It's fantastic.
And I think the last Twitter question I'm going to ask from @gravy_navy is, were there any cinematic or thematic rules set for how the boards on Mutant Mayhem were laid out? I think that's kind of interesting. Did you guys kind of like have some references? Kind of like, because I've been kind of like in rooms sometimes when they're like, oh, it's going to be a little Edgar Wright and like mixed with a little like Wes Anderson and this and that, you know?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when we first started the movie, we had some films that the directors really wanted to use as inspiration, and then they're all live action, so a lot of the stuff I feel like that you see very typical in animation is that the camera moves in like an impossible way sometimes, where it's like spinning around the characters while they're flying, and it's like it's really fantastic. But I think the directors wanted ours to be slightly more grounded. To a lot of the films we're referencing were kind of like handheld and almost like a documentary, where it's like the camera feel like originally was like, oh, it's got to feel like you're just you've got a camera and you're in the same room as the turtles and you're just kind of observing them do these things. And eventually it slightly changed once we started to do action, because I think action cinematography sometimes, same thing, the camera language can vary a lot, but I think animation camera language is a lot of crazy camera movements and like a lot of Dutch angles. I have like a personal vendetta against Dutch angles. I hate them so much.
Yeah.
But like,
they make all animation stuff very hard.
Yeah.
Like once you start adding a bunch of Dutch angles, and then like, are you gonna reuse that Dutch angle ever?
Yeah.
Like, is it throws economic film animation making out the window. There's all sorts of stuff.
It's also like so campy. I feel like there's like, you can use the Dutch angles if you're like doing some kind of like a super campy kind of like spoof type of movie, but I feel like, you know, it's so
and like our movie we definitely have Dutch angles and like tilted cameras, but for sure less so than I would say a lot of animated movies. And I feel like I just remember when I was in school, we had a perspective and layout teacher, and his name is Dan Hansen, and I think one time we had to do layouts, and like, you know, some kids were doing Dutch angles because, you know, they wanted to do something different, something more dramatic, and like he went on like a small tirade about it, because he was like, he just took a picture, like a portrait or something, and then he just like put it on the wall, and he said, "This is a nice picture," and then he like just like tilted it on the wall, and it's like, now is this more dramatic? Is this picture more dynamic for you guys? And it kind of highlighted how I feel like a lot of kids think that, you know, tilting the camera and making everything diagonal lines makes things more dramatic, when there wasn't a lot of thought put into it. They just like, they're like, oh, this scene needs to be more intense, I'm gonna tilt the camera now. And I think my personal thing was just like always trying to avoid that unless like there was a real reason for it. And I think we opted more for locked cameras, kind of referencing like Jackie Chan films. There was a film that I really liked referencing, which is Kung Fu Hustle. And
man, that movie's so good.
It's so good. It's like the action is so good, and it's also just like a really great,
it's so silly,
really great comedy movie. And it was like, there was a lot of stuff in there that I thought could be useful for, you know, a Ninja Turtles movie. It's like, it's action, but we want it to be funny.
I totally saw that in that scene when Splinter comes in to save the turtles, and I was like, ooh, this is a great sequence, because it's finally a sequence in animation where they did what, because I feel like a lot of people are like, ooh, just like Jackie Chan, like, you know, because of like the every frame of painting, so everyone's like, just like Jackie Chan movies, and then they cut a million times, and then it's not like Jackie Chan movies, but like that sequence there where Splinter comes in, and it's like the right amount of comedy, and you can read all the action, and it made me so happy. It's such a great sequence.
Yeah, I really enjoyed working on stuff like that. I feel like the highest compliment was like, I think someone on Twitter was like, I bet you Jackie Chan consulted or like helped choreograph this, and we're like, oh, awesome. That's sweet. He definitely did not, because he'd probably make us pay him $1 billion for it, but
I was wondering, like, as both an action fan and a comedy fan, a comedic action fan, I was wondering if there were any little steps or reminders that you and the board team would give yourselves to make sure that, oftentimes with action scenes now, I feel like you accidentally shift to everything being really, really, really cool, like the coolest possible anime fight scene kind of thing.
Yeah.
And how did you kind of keep it like hey, we just had a bunch of cool shots, but nothing is funny has happened, nothing funny or sloppy or, you know, whatever has happened in this scene, like slapstick or anything. Is there a way that you guys would check yourselves on that a little bit?
So I don't think there was like a standout like rule that we had on a document saying like, let's do this, but but I think everyone that was doing an action sequence was really good about, I guess, first and foremost, trying to board the action sequence in context with like the story. So
Okay, good. Yeah.
so like the very first fight sequence that was in the movie that I worked on was that chop shop fight, and like the whole point of that was that the Ninja Turtles had never fought villains before. They weren't good at it, so like that fight needed to be more chaotic. Like that one had more camera moves and like just trying to add to that chaotic energy of just like, you know, having the camera follow them all around as they're running around a chop shop that's like slowly setting on fire. And then another scene after that John Jackson boarded, one of my favorite sequences was like the no diggity like montage thing where they're just like fighting a bunch of villains, but it's like time cut, so they're all doing the exact same choreography, but so like you match cut it, and like it's such a beautiful sequence, and like he came up with that idea himself, and it just worked so perfectly. To just the idea of like trying to show a montage and an action scene at the same time, and it worked great. And it was just the only times where it didn't work was probably actually the Splinter fight. I think we struggled with that one the most, and it was kind of what you were talking about, Sean, where the first couple iterations we had didn't work, and they didn't work because we made Splinter too badass, and it turned into it turned into him just like beating the shit out of people for like 5 minutes. And there was like, I think in action sequences, in my opinion at least, like there should be a story. Like it doesn't have to be super complex, but there's got to be some kind of like thing that defines the characters fighting and like what they're thinking or feeling. But also like I think every fight sequence has to have some kind of like flow or rhythm to it. So like I feel like a lot of kung fu movies, there's like they're fighting and there's like a back and forth of like the hero losing the fight and then like slowly clawing his way back, and there's like a pacing that's really hard to describe, but I feel like most people will recognize when the pacing's off, or if there's no back and forth within the fight, because like what ended up happening. Sorry, go ahead.
No. I was just gonna ask. So, what did you find to be the problem? What was the solution in the Splinter fight? Was it like finding a way to make it funnier, or adding a story, or?
Yeah, I think making it goofier, making Splinter feel more like the shut-in dad character that he was, so that he wasn't like the first couple of versions we had. He was just Neo or like the Terminator. He was just killing everybody, and it was like they were very cool action sequences, but like I said earlier, it was 5 minutes of him just beating the shit out of everyone on screen. And if it's just 5 minutes of just nonstop punching with like no change in what's happening, like he's just winning for 5 minutes, and you start to get bored, and like nothing feels special anymore. And so the changes that we tried to make were making him feel more like a shut-in dad, and he's good at martial arts, but he's still gonna slowly be overwhelmed, and kind of trying like taking a page out of Jackie Chan in terms of like, I think what makes his fights compelling and fun is that he gets beaten up a lot during his fights. Like he's always on the back foot, and he's just like struggling to keep up with the amount of guys coming at him. And I think that was more or less when we started to think that we had a solution for that sequence.
So how does a tone change work when you have, a movie with scripts, and when you're figuring out a tone change in the fight scene, where I'm sure that, it's not, there's probably some lines over the course of that fight and that kind of thing. How does making a tone change like that work in between you and the writers?
I think a lot of that stuff is probably for our show more heavily dependent on the board artists and the direction of the directors. I don't think I don't think any of our fight sequences were scripted out in terms of like these are the things that need to happen. They were more just like the Splinter fight. Splinter comes in and like he's there to save his sons, and he beats everyone up at the end, and then it's kind of up to us to figure out how he does that. And then like,
So would you suggest dialogue in the boards, and then they would do with that what they would?
yeah, a lot of
So
like small ideas are mainly just the board artist's job to come up with. Like going back to the chop shop fight, um, all we knew was that like Jeff wanted to be that a sequence where the Ninja Turtles were not good at fighting and they win the fight, but they were not badasses. So it's like they gotta win. It's gotta be sloppy, and it's just gotta be, you know, they have to like not be good at kicking ass yet. And one of the suggestions was like, oh, in the script it said, oh, maybe Raphael slips on a grease puddle before the fight even starts. Just to have them kind of on the ground before the fight even starts. And then when I boarded it, I think I kind of thought, oh, it could be funny if like when he slips, like one of his sides like stabs Donnie, and it was just like stuff like that where,
yeah.
and I talked about this at Pixelato, but for that sequence in particular, as I was boarding the beginning part, I had another board artist help me board the back end, because we had like a general idea of like, okay, the turtles come in, it's a disaster, and at the end they win. So we had another board artist, Charlie, board the back end, and he had ideas. He was like, we're in a chop shop, we're in like a place full of cars, so like what if we had one of the villains try to run the turtles over? And so he had boarded all that stuff as I was boarding the beginning part, and seeing all his ideas gave me ideas for how to board the middle part. And it was like, oh, I could set up the guy running them over with a car earlier in the fight, like if someone gets knocked out in a car, so that later on in the fight you've kind of forgotten about him, but then you cut back to him and he wakes up and he sees the turtles, and like you've got it all set up so that he can just like turn on the car and like pump the gas. And it was a lot of stuff like that in those sequences where it was just a team effort in terms of coming up with ideas.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's so cool. Talking about coming up with ideas, we have a question that we ask all of our guests. Do you experience creative block? And if you do, what does it feel like, and how do you deal with it?
Yes, I do get creative blocks way more often than I am like comfortable. way more often than I'd like, I guess. And I think sometimes there's like a lot of pressure on productions, because you're like, I gotta always have a great idea, and sometimes if you have a bad pitch, and I'm sure you've had them too sometimes, where you've had a bad pitch and the room's just kind of quiet at the end, and like you're just like, oh shit, I'm gonna get fired now. I feel like there's a lot of, maybe not everyone, obviously. I think some people are more put together than I am, but I'm always just like, I'm only as good as my last idea. And if I do a shitty idea, then obviously like I'm cooked, I'm done. It stresses me out a lot when I have creative blocks, because then I'm like, well, fuck. Well, now I have a deadline in a week. What am I gonna do? This particular Ninja Turtles production, I think, has been amazing for me, because I think the directors were very understanding about like that this happens to everyone, and it's something that I personally like as a head of story, I'm trying my best to use that approach when working with the story team, because I feel like going back to the Splinter fight, like a bunch of artists worked on it, and then I like near the tail end I had to work on it, and I couldn't figure it out either. and it was just like, this sequence just isn't working, and it was like a giant creative block for me personally. And it was really frustrating because like we had done so many fight sequences before that, and like we were like, why doesn't this one work? And I think it was great for our production to both just say, okay, let's just take our hands off of this for a while. Like, we'll all do something else. We like won't think about this problem for a bit, come back to it and see how we feel about it, and maybe like some ideas will come. Some ideas did come, but I was still kind of in a creative block. And what ended up happening is like we were so far into production that we basically had to start handing these sequences out to previs and layout. And for this particular scene, it was just like, this sequence isn't quite working, but we gotta send it. And you're like, it sucked sending in something that you're like, this sequence is still just kind of flat. And what was great about this production is they really allowed me and the board team, or like whatever was left of it at that time, like they really let us work with the layout team, which I've never experienced before. So the layout team, the layout team took a look at this sequence, and the artists kind of added their own ideas to it. They're like, oh, maybe it could be a little funnier if we have Splinter running around and having the guards chase him. And there was a lot of moments like that where them coming up with their own ideas for this allowed me to kind of go back in and just like piggyback off of their ideas and being like, oh yeah, like this makes this area better, and now like for the final fight. And then I could just like, and at that stage we didn't have time to board out full things, so I would just board out like almost like schematics or like little blueprints where I'd like draw a map or a diagram of where Splinter is, and I draw a camera and be like, okay, if we just, and I just thumbnail stuff out. So like, if we just move the camera here and follow him as he does these things, and then like going back and forth with layout, and then like, you know, they'd spend the day and they'd have that camera shot, and then like we could come up with ideas for what Splinter does within that. And it was like a really great experience, but also it was great being in a production that was able to say every artist has like creative blocks, and we can confidently, even though it's like less than ideal, we can confidently hand it off to the next person, knowing that they'll add something of value to it, and it takes a little bit of the pressure off of like one individual to like just have the full fleshed out idea.
Yeah, and then you when you're on a crew, you can schedule out like, all right, so I'm gonna have creative block on this week. And
Yeah,
you can have
and then
creative block next week.
and then you'll do it next, and that way it'll all work.
But they never
out.
overlap.
Yeah.
That's really cool though that you guys could talk to the layout team. Was the layout team in house, or was it in Mikros?
I think it was like a little bit of a split. So we had the head of the previous team in LA, and maybe I think 2 other artists, and then everyone else was like working at Mikros, or we had 2 vendors. We had Mikros and Cinesite. So there would be some like of him relaying stuff to the other team, but we got to mainly work with the people based here in-house at the very end, which was great.
It's really cool. Talking about the very end, y'all, this is the end of this creative block.
Yeah.
Gabe, thank you so much for being our guest and sharing your story.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
And thanks to our listeners. Follow us on Twitter at Creative Blog, where we ask for drawing prompts and questions to ask our guests. Huge thanks to our editor, Clemens, for editing this podcast, and Marco for helping us produce the show.
If you love our show, you can support us on Patreon. Becoming a patron gets you Discord access, early access to interviews, as well as bonus episodes. We're working on it for the bonus episodes. We haven't released some in a while. But another way you can also support us is to comment, share, subscribe, just interacting with our content, help us reach a wider audience. And we just want to help out as many animation fans out there with all these wonderful interviews. Click the link in the description of this episode to see Gabe's socials and the Patreon and all of these great things. I've been your host, V.
And I'm a sad little animal Sean in the Chicago Zoo that you guys please follow us to cheer up. Cheer me up. I need help. Free me. Keep being creative, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.